Oh dear. I'm not sure if the makers of this movie were going for comedy horror or something else, but it didn't really work. It was basically a film of silly voices. There wasn't enough tension to hold my engagement or enough story to keep me interested. Some of the effects were good, but nothing I haven't seen before. Russell Crowe was enjoyable to watch, but it was difficult to take his character seriously, and I'm not sure as a viewer I was supposed to. It was all just a bit too silly for my taste. I didn't believe the setting. It was too fantastical, and the family characters were more like caricatures. It sort of hinted at a story for them, but that didn't really go anywhere. So, superfluous and silly, but not awful. I watch a lot of movies, and horrors are a particular favorite of mine, but with actors' budget this one has, I expected it to be at least decent, but I'd put it down as one of the worst films I've ever seen. I nearly walked out at multiple points as it just got dumber and dumber and was trying to act like it was a credit for a serious film, even potentially teasing more, but I hope that was just explaining their future, as this is S world that never needs revisiting. Why on earth did they cast him as the lead? I mean, his name value isn't as big as it was, but he was awful. His accent, delivery, and well, just about everything was bad here. I'd have been so embarrassed. Surely there are Italian actors or ones who would have lent credibility to the role. The effects were tragic. The stuff with the women was hilarious, but again looked ridiculous, and the family weren't remotely interesting or likable, and some of the stuff the little boy said will no doubt be used as a joke for years to come. It was all so corny and ridiculous. There was nothing remotely scary, the story was rotten, and the acting was even worse. Don't waste your money. I've seen plenty of Exorcist movies, from big obvious ones to budget DVD ones, and this isn't even good enough to be a cheap DVD. Avoid. Based on a real character from the murkier side of quite recent Vatican operations, Russell Crowe dons his cassock and travels to a remote abbey in Spain where he meets with Fur. Esqui Bell, Daniel Zovato. Why? Well, it seems that a young boy is being possessed by a singularly nasty demon. Now Fur. Amorth is not unused to these scenarios and is also aware that the vast majority of these situations have nothing to do with satanic practices and more to do with mental health issues. Quickly, though, he realizes that this is a serious and potentially deadly demonization, and both he and his colleague must discover what went on at this place and just who their violent foe is, before they can have any hope of casting it back into the shadows. That's the plot, and to be fair, Crowe actually plays his character with a bit of charisma, but the rest of this is the same old loudly scored, visual effects feast with plenty of routine dramatic scenes. Screaming, eye-popping, ceiling climbing, bodies and holy water thrown about the place, and this one even has a bit of the Spanish Inquisition thrown in for added authenticity. It's not that it is terrible, it isn't, it is just also very derivative. Just because The Exorcist was real doesn't actually make this film any different from a whole spate of other similar films that have the same beginning, middle, and end. It will do fine on the television around Halloween, but the cinema adds little to the presentation. It's nice to see that Franco Nero is still making films, but otherwise this is adequate, but nothing more. We live in a world where there have been thousands of demon possession horror films, and most of them suck. Nearly every one of them has taken elements from the few good ones and butchered them in execution. Tropes abound in these films, and they almost never have anything interesting to say and never do a single original nor compelling thing throughout their entire runtimes. This is not one of those movies, thankfully. Granted, it does make use of tropes, and all of the more action-heavy scenes are full of cliches and visual tricks that got old about 30 years ago. But the Pope's Exorcist screenplay is significantly more interesting than I expected it to be. It fleshes out the two main priest characters as human beings and plays with the relationship between guilt and personal faith to shockingly effective results. I became invested in these characters' success because I wanted them to overcome their pasts. This rarely happens to me when I watch movies like this. I was also impressed with Julius Avery's direction. He uses some very clever tricks with the camera to place the character's emotional stare at the center of the action, so the film never becomes tiresome to look at and certainly never gets boring. That's not to say that the film is great or revolutionary, though. Although Russell Crowe's performance helps keep the movie afloat, the story doesn't do anything new, and the climax plays out in the exact same overly dramatized, melodramatic way that all of these possession movies play out. It builds up some intriguing concepts, but it didn't stick the landing with them in a way that would have been memorable.